we know Nottingham Forest's fate for breaking financial rules, a 4 points deduction that sees them dive into relegation zone. They're now on 21 points, a point off Luton, making that late goal at Kenilworth Road feel even more costly. And it is a slightly complicated situation. Try not to let your eyes glaze over, as clubs are usually allowed, as I'm sure you'll know by now, a maximum loss of £105 million over a 3-year assessment. That's reduced by £22 million, are you still with me, per season, for any season within that period spent in the Championship. So Forest's permitted loss threshold was £61 million. They lost £95.5 million, breaking, profit and sustainability rules by just over 50%. However, there's a complicating factor that they sold a player within about 6 weeks to 2 months after the window shut, as far as the Premier League's concerned, which would have got them well out of trouble. It is complicated. And joining us now to talk about that is Ryan Freebury. I imagine he's smarting a bit. He's from the Forever Forest podcast, of course, Darling the Wolf Forest fan. And also, welcome back to Thomas Robertson from the Toffee Blues podcast, because Everton, having already been docked a good few points, are waiting to know their fate going forward. Good morning, Ryan. Good morning, Thomas. Let me start with you, Ryan. So as I understand it, had the Brennan Johnson sale to Spurs gone through maybe 8 weeks earlier, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, which seems to me odd, because the transfer window opened on June the 14th. He was sold on the very last day, which was September the 1st, and yet the Premier League wanted all these accounts in by June the 30th, which seems to me just a really odd state of affairs, that you're allowing a market to start and they're not seeing it through to the end.
Yeah, it's difficult, Paul, because I've kind of got my hand over my eyes while I'm talking to you, just trying to scratch my head with it. We say it on the podcast and other things we've done media-wise, where it's kind of like, none of us are financial experts in what we do, so I've kind of said we'll just go with whatever we go with. But it does... I'm trying to keep away from saying it's kind of a closed shop and that it's one rule for them and one for the other, because you end up sounding like, someone's moaning, going, what about Man City? What about Chelsea? All this kind of business. But one thing we can't deny is the club have breached what their rules are. I agree with you. I think the Brennan Johnson thing is sustainability. You want to try and get more money for it, and the rules are what the rules are for the time. So I'm partly sort of a bit flabbergasted at what the club have done in some senses, but at the same time, I think when you've seen, the 9 points, what it is for insolvency, it could be in the Premier League, what, at 8, and what they've done with Everton as well, it's hard to get away from feeling like you might be one of the smaller things on their agenda, if that makes sense.
Because as I understand it, they initially were pushing for an 8-point deduction from your mob, and that is only 1 point below what you get for insolvency, which is like going out of business, and you got it reduced down to 4 because of they said, complete and admirable cooperation, but it doesn't sound like they're actually, cutting you that much slack on this one.
Well, no, what I'm quite surprised about is that the club itself have been as punchy as they have. I know they've got Nick DeMarco on the case for it, who's obviously worked for a lot of different clubs, I think, with Man City stuff as well. But it feels like the club have been quite punchy and said how disappointed they are in the Premier League, and they're saying that, it's not a system that helps with fairness. I mean, to be honest, I know if I was sat and this was happening to our lovely rivals, Derby County, I'd be going, well, you know the rules, and if you don't want to play by the rules, you don't stay in them. So, and I consider myself a fair fan, Paul, and there's a big part where I'm kind of going, it is what it is, and you've done what you've done. But at the same time, it's, for me as well, there's a hard thing as a fan that we've dropped 21 points from winning positions. So this wouldn't even be a really conversation if we'd got that together there as well. But how are you meant to? We're a bit of a weird case, because we've come up from the Championship, so this only second season back up after 20 odd year, and it's kind of like it's kind of different rules.
That's the point. I appreciate Thomas Robertson standing by. Thomas, we are going to get to you, matey, from the Toffee Blues podcast. One last thing on that was, though, I mean, they quantify the amount of time you spend in the Championship was £22 million. They say, okay, you're permitted to earn an extra £22 million earned because you're not getting broadcast money. How can they possibly quantify that, though, in just those terms, when, for all we know, had you gone up 3 or 4 seasons earlier, you might have attracted, like, the biggest sponsor, possibly in, getting in Premier League history, for all we know. So there's no way of predicting what your revenue might have been. It all seems to be so arbitrary.
Well, how would they quantify it as well? Because, one thing I will say I'm an expert on is seeing teams come down with parachute payments and do really well and then come straight back up, and, we've been there floundering in the lower leagues, as it would be. So how
I must say, I'm on record as saying how corrupt I think the system is, and I think it's, they must review that, because it's like a reward for failure.
Yeah, exactly. And they're changing the rules at the end of the next summer as well. So I said to you, I didn't want to come on and sort of be so much of what it is, because it is what it is, and it could have been a lot worse. But at the same time, I have felt more and more, I mean, we could go on different arguments about VR and all stuff like that, but it feels a bit of a closed shop, and you're not meant to be in there anymore. Even though we've got 2 European, Cup stars shining on our badge, they don't seem to be caring about any of that business. So.
Well, let's go now to the very patient Thomas Robertson. Good morning, Thomas. Sorry to keep you hanging on there, mate, but I wanted to kind of let Ryan set out his stall. Ryan Freebury from the Forever Forest podcast. Now, talking of the closed shop, of course, you've never been out of the Premier League, but we're still waiting to hear what your points deduction might be having on appeal, had it reduced down to what you had another. It was originally 10, and now it's 6, I think you've had deducted. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're down to 6 now, and just waiting for the next breach, which at the end of the day, I've got absolutely no idea what's going to happen, considering I mean, what's happened today? I can't believe that we ended up with 10 points originally. Forest have only picked up 4. We're now waiting for this.
And again, we said at the time, when it's 9 points for insolvency, one extra just seems to me punitive beyond measure, unacceptable.
Yeah, it's absolutely baffling, but this happens when the clubs decided not to actually have a strict framework of what punishment it's going to be. When you leave it down to independent commissions, it just seems that they can kind of come up with whatever they want. I mean, I'm still absolutely baffled by our first 10-point deduction. And I said on here before, I didn't actually expect to get anything back, so when we got the 4 back, I was quite happy with that. But for this second breach, I mean, I'd imagine the Premier League would probably just want to get us back to that 10 that they gave us originally. So it's a really frustrating time. Seeing Forest only picking up 4 today it just seems absolutely ridiculous. There doesn't seem to be any sort of system in place to achieve consistency.
I do think they are kind of making their own rules up as they go along, or testing the water and seeing how things. But I mean, there's a horrible phrase for people in government, which is when they say things like, "We are minded to do so and so," and if there's a negative reaction, they change their mind. I wonder whether the Premier League are doing an element of that, having think, "Oops, we got it wrong with Everton the first time around. We'll try and be slightly different with Forest," and then expect a bit of flack. But I honestly don't. I mean, I can't see, if I go back to Ryan very quickly, Ryan Freebury from the Forever Forest podcast, I can't see any point in Forest appealing this because no new evidence can be introduced. All you can do is replead the existing mitigating circumstances, which they'll say, I'd imagine, one they've taken into account already.
Well, I'd agree with you. I think the only thing that I'm seeing bandied about is people are saying if you're not going to lose any more points for appealing, you might as well appeal. And then it's the way that Forest have worded their statement makes me feel like they're up for a fight with it. I mean, I completely understand Thomas' point of view. When their thing come in themselves, I was like, well, this is crazy. And obviously when you're down there, we don't want it like that. I don't want any clubs deducted from it. You want it to just be a level playing field. We all understand. If you score a goal, you win a game, it's 3 points. We know how that works. No one seems to know what's happening here. Apart, and I'm going to say Man City, I'm going to say other clubs like that. We don't know what the heck's going on with anything.
Well, the curious thing for me is, let's go back to Thomas now, Thomas Robertson. Thomas, the curious thing for me is that we know that some of the charges against City have been proven to as far as UEFA are concerned. They only weren't punished or sanctioned by it, by UEFA, Man City, because of the statute of limitations effectively have run out. Which means, it seems to me, those, after the most cursory of investigations, you could say, right, they've all been proven against you. Let's deal with those first. Have some kind of immediate justice, because justice delayed is justice denied. Whereas, it's well over a year now since those 100-odd charges were levelled against Man City, and all we know from the FA is, there's going to be a hearing sometime this year, and they couldn't say in front of a load of MPs when that was going to be. This seems to be an absolutely disgraceful set of double standards.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to get into City too much because it's a whole different ball game of anything we've ever seen in the Premier League. 115 charges. Yeah. It is definitely going to take time. And for some reason, the Premier League, our first deduction dragged on for a while. Now the Premier League have decided that they want it all wrapped up within the season. Funnily enough, I think that's because they're going to move the goalposts in the summer, and all of a sudden we're going to have a new set of rules where we won't see anything like this again. So, really unfortunate, I'd say, for us, especially because we're going to be hit with it twice. I feel for Forest as well. The Premier League just seem to be making it up as they go along, and they'll change the rules again in the summer. So I can barely comment on really what's happening because it's so hard to predict what they're going to do. Seemingly now it's left to an independent commission. They will just decide what they like. There's absolutely no framework whatsoever for what kind of punishment they can actually give out. So I find it impossible to even try and predict what's going to happen there.
Well, also, it seems to me, in law, it's very easy to set a scale of punishment and have it as a sliding scale, and to allow the judge, whoever's on the tribunal, whoever's involved in this, to do what they've done already, they said to an extent, admit mitigating circumstances. But the fact they immediately hit Everton with a 10-point reduction, I automatically thought, this is chaos, this is anarchy. As I've mentioned repeatedly, if it's 9 points for insolvency, what you did, they say, even though the club's still solvent, and still in the Premier League, still playing, still earning money and paying people and being a hub for your community, they're saying it's worse than you going bankrupt, which is a nonsense.
Yeah, well, that was definitely an argument that was used originally. That it definitely cannot be over 9 points. We're solvent for now, but who knows how long that will last. But as I said, I've completely just lost faith in the Premier League to govern properly and govern fairly. As was said before, Forest, 2 times European Cup winners. We know about our history as well. The Premier League don't care about the rest of the clubs anymore. They care about their shiny top 6. They'll change the goalposts. They'll move everything around for them like they will for City. City will get off lightly. So, I've literally got no faith in the Premier League whatsoever to actually govern their own rules fairly.
And let me ask you this, Thomas. I mean, you guys hear from fans, you talk to fans, you're fans yourself. I'd imagine the mood is lower than a snake's belly at times, but how are the fans feeling overall about this? Because you must feel like the whipping boys, both sides must feel like the whipping boys for the Premier League.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone's just in absolute dismay, to be honest. And I think everyone's just, like me, just kind of given up hope that the Premier League will deal with this fairly. People were absolutely baffled today when the news broke about Forest only getting 4 points, because that felt unfair to us, considering we started with 10, went down to 6. And our overspending was because of capitalisation of stadium costs, not actually spending on the pitch. So I think everyone's just in a state of dismay, really, and people are just completely lost faith in the Premier League to do anything fairly.
It does seem to me as well, if we go back to Ryan Freeby from the Forever Forest podcast, that last voice was Thomas Robertson from the Toffee Blues podcast. Seems to me as if maybe they've got a set of like analogue rules for a digital age, because the cases we're talking about here are very different. You had money coming in, you knew. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, Brennan Johnson was worth money. You held out and got, $47.5 million for him from Spurs. They maybe wish they kept the receipt and got their money back, but that's another question. But you kind of think, had you taken much less for him, even had you banked it then, you wouldn't have got the interest that your kind of financial probity, the cleverness of your sales team got for that deal. And there's no account for that. And in finance, I mean, I've done it myself. I'm not going to say it if the HMRC are listening, but occasionally you think, I might push it a bit on that account, that expense, and see what happens. It seems there's no wiggle room for either of you.
I can't understand. I would love to know somebody from the club, and we're probably never going to get this from my club, exactly what the plan was with it outside of that, because we've been finding out today that apparently Atletico Madrid had thrown in a couple of quite big offers around the Tottenham one. Now, the Tottenham one is a domino effect because of Harry Kane's transfer. They were waiting for him to go to Bayern for the money for this. So it's, and I know it's not, there's a lot of moving parts to what this is, but
again, if I can tell you, they must know the Premier League because they preside over it, of the brinkmanship that's involved in the transfer window. It's not a surprise to anybody that the Brennan Johnson deal was done on the very last day.
No, it's not. But there is a part of me that's going, what did they think if they didn't take that? If Atletico money apparently would have put us within the right time frame if we'd have taken it when we did. What was the thinking? It was almost like going, you hadn't done your homework, but you're still going to school. It's going, what did you think the teacher was going to do on that day? What was the backup plan of going?
Well, if you've got Miss Jones for geography, then you can get away with it. But not if you've got Mr. Harmer for maths, then you're in big trouble. That's the way it seems to be, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Are we in a prayer?
No, it's crazy. And I think, look, you asked a similar thing, Thomas. I think with us at the minute, as fans, we're not on great form at the minute. I've seen this club go. I was there when Brian Clough on his last home game, and we went down in 92, 93. I've seen a lot of stuff through the years, right? And I think that this feels like a relegation team at the minute, how it's feeling. So we've got now an international break, and I'm going funny with this one, Paul. We're meant to be the home of Robin Hood, the Merry Men, the Outlaws. Forest has to get a bit almost like a nasty mentality now. Everton look like they got that straight away when they're their point of deduction. If we, and no disrespect to the teams below, everyone's got their reasons to be there. But if we can't pull this with the fixtures we've got versus those around us, maybe like your Lutons, and we don't make it a fortress and don't make us a big thing behind them as a team, then we don't deserve to be there in that, whatever the points thing is. I think it stinks. I think there's issues within it. But right now, Forest needs to roll the socks up and just get going.
So basically summon Little John, Will Scarlett and the rest of the lads, the Outlaws, to sort things out. And I think, there was certainly, not just because Sean Dyche arrives, and not just Everton are a fantastically tenacious team anyway. What are your final thoughts on this one then, Thomas? Have you got any idea when you're going to hear your ruling for the other transgression?
I'm not entirely sure, really, but as we know, the Premier League wanted to wrap it all up this season, so I'd imagine it'll be in the next few weeks, because then we'll need time to inevitably lodge an appeal. As I said before, you're not going to lose any more points by appealing, so you may as well. So I can't imagine it'll be too far in the future. But literally, who knows what's going to happen? My thoughts are they'll probably give us 4 so that we get back to that 10 and kind of save space for them a little bit. But at the end of the day, we're now being punished. This second breach, we're being punished for 3 years, 2 of which was actually for the first punishment. Yeah. So I've literally absolutely no idea how the rules even work at this point.
Listen, can we make an agreement though, guys? Can we reconvene in 5 years' time when no doubt the Man City verdict will be delivered? Because it ain't going to be any time soon, is it? You've been very measured in your responses, I must say, and I really appreciate that. Ryan Freeby there from the Forever Forest podcast, and also Thomas Robertson from the Toffee Blues podcast, of course, talking to us about we know Forest points deduction now. Everton are waiting for another, maybe not, but another, I'd anticipate, points deduction coming down the line. If you've got a view on this one, I'd love to hear from you. 03717 22 33 44. The Premier League. Mr. Bumble says in Oliver Twist, the law is an ass. I think he's right.